Brother tried to move his family into my house, while I took the camper and mom packed him up, saying, "He actually has a real family while yours are adopted." So I moved out. But the next day, their smile vanished. All right, Reddit, I need to get this off my chest because what happened to me over the past few months has completely turned my world upside down. I'm still processing everything, and honestly, I'm not sure I've handled it the right way. But here's the story of how my own family basically tried to kick me out of my own house, and why they're now desperately trying to get me back. I'm George, 34 male, and this is about my brother Dylan, 29 male. We've never been super close, but I always thought we had that typical sibling relationship where we'd bicker but ultimately have each other's backs. Turns out I was completely wrong about that. To understand why this hit me so hard, you need to know our family situation. Dylan has two kids with his wife Melissa, Emma, who's 7, and Jake, who's 5. They're biological kids, his real family, as my mom loves to put it. My situation is different. My wife Sarah and I have been married for 8 years, and we have two adopted kids, Anna, who's 9, and Finn, who's 6. We also have Sarah's niece Zoe, who's 11, living with us after her parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. Now, here's where it gets complicated. My parents, especially my mom, have always treated Dylan's kids like they're the only real grandchildren. It's subtle most of the time. More Christmas presents, more attention at family gatherings, always talking about how Emma has Dylan's eyes or how Jake has the family nose. Meanwhile, my kids get the polite but distant treatment. "Oh, that's nice, dear," when Anna shows them a drawing, but genuine excitement when Emma colors inside the lines. Sarah noticed it way before I did. She'd point out how mom would spend 20 minutes gushing over photos of Dylan's kids, but barely glance at pictures of ours. How dad would get down on the floor to play with Emma and Jake, but just pat my kids on the head. I kept making excuses. They're just more comfortable with younger kids. They've known Emma and Jake since birth. It's not intentional. Looking back, I was an idiot for not seeing what was right in front of me. The house situation is important to this story. 3 years ago, Sarah and I bought this amazing 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood. It's nothing fancy, but it's ours. Good schools for the kids, big backyard, quiet street. We saved for years for the down payment, worked our asses off to afford it. Sarah's a nurse and I'm in IT, so we do okay. But this house was a stretch for us financially. Dylan, on the other hand, has always been irresponsible with money. He works construction when he can find steady work, but he's got this attitude that the world owes him something. Always has some get-rich-quick scheme. Always complaining about how unfair life is. Melissa doesn't work because she says she needs to be home with the kids, which is fine, but they're constantly struggling financially. They've been living in this crappy 2-bedroom apartment for the past 4 years. The kids have to share a tiny room. The place has heating issues, and it's in a rough part of town. Not dangerous exactly, but not where you'd want to raise kids if you had other options. About 6 months ago, Dylan started making comments about how lucky Sarah and I were to have such a nice house with just 3 kids. How it must be nice to have all that space. I didn't think much of it at first. Yeah, we were fortunate, but we worked hard for what we had. Then the comments got more specific. "Man, you guys have a whole room that's barely used," referring to our guest rooms, our office. "The kids would love having a big backyard like yours." Emma keeps asking why her cousins get to live in such a nice house and she doesn't. That last one pissed me off, but I let it slide. The real problem started about 3 months ago when Dylan's landlord decided to sell the building. Their rent was going to double, which they obviously couldn't afford. Dylan came to me asking if they could crash at our place just for a few weeks while they found something new. I talked it over with Sarah. We both felt bad for the kids, so we said they could use the guest room for a month max. It would be tight, but family helps family, right? That was my first mistake. The second Dylan and his family moved in, everything changed. Suddenly, Dylan was acting like he owned the place. He'd rearrange furniture without asking, take over the TV in the living room, leave his stuff everywhere. Melissa acted like she was the lady of the house, reorganizing my kitchen, telling my kids to keep it down because Emma and Jake were napping. But the worst part was how they treated my kids. Dylan would make these jokes about how Anna and Finn weren't real siblings since they were adopted, how Zoe was just Sarah's responsibility, not really part of our family. When I called him out on it, he'd say he was just kidding, that I needed to lighten up. Sarah was ready to kick them out after the first week. I should have listened to her. Instead, I kept trying to keep the peace. These were Dylan's kids we were talking about, my nephew and niece. I couldn't just put them out on the street, right? So when the month was up and Dylan said they needed just a little more time, I said okay. That was my second mistake. By month 2, Dylan wasn't even pretending to look for a new place. He'd found some part-time work but was spending his money on beer and takeout instead of saving for a deposit on an apartment. When I brought it up, he'd get defensive and say he was doing his best, that it was harder than I thought to find a decent place they could afford. Meanwhile, my kids were miserable. They couldn't have friends over because Emma and Jake would dominate any activity. Anna had to give up her art space in the basement because Dylan turned it into his man cave with a TV and his PlayStation. Finn started having nightmares and wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done in over a year. Sarah and I were fighting constantly because she wanted them gone and I kept making excuses. Our marriage was suffering. Our kids were suffering. But I was too stupid to see that Dylan was playing me. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago. I was at work when Sarah called me, crying. She could barely get the words out at first, but eventually she told me what happened. She'd come home from her shift at the hospital to find Dylan, and Melissa had completely rearranged our living room. They'd moved our family photos to make room for their stuff, rearranged the furniture to make better use of the space, and get this, they'd actually moved my kids' stuff out of their bedrooms. Anna's room had been converted into Emma's princess palace, complete with pink everything and Anna's art supplies thrown in boxes. Finn's room was now Jake's big boy room, with all of Finn's toys either taken or given away. Zoe's room was untouched, but only because Melissa said she didn't feel comfortable dealing with someone else's kid. When Sarah asked what the hell they thought they were doing, Dylan said they'd talk to mom and dad, and everyone agreed that this arrangement made more sense. The kids should be in real bedrooms, not crammed into one guest room. My kids could move into the guest room, or even better, they could set up the camper in the backyard for Sarah and me. The fucking camper. My parents had given us this small travel trailer a few years back that we used for camping trips. Dylan seriously suggested that Sarah and I should live in a camper in our own backyard, so his family could have the house. When Sarah refused and started moving our kids' stuff back, Dylan called mom. Within an hour, my parents were at the house, and that's when I got the call to come home immediately. I raced home to find a family meeting in progress in my living room. My living room. Mom was sitting in my chair like she owned the place. Dad was on the couch with Dylan, and everyone was looking at Sarah like she was the problem. Finally, Mom said when I walked in, we need to settle this situation. I looked around at the chaos. Boxes everywhere, furniture moved around. My kids huddled together on the stairs looking confused and scared. What situation? I asked. That's when Mom laid it on me. Dylan's family needed stability. Emma and Jake deserved to grow up in a nice neighborhood with good schools. It made sense for them to live in the house while Sarah and I took the camper or figured out other arrangements. Other arrangements? I said. This is our house. Yes, but they have a real family, Mom said. 2 biological children who need space to grow. Your kids are, well, they're adopted. They should be grateful for whatever they get. The room went dead silent. Even Dylan looked uncomfortable, though he didn't say anything to defend me. Are you seriously suggesting that my kids matter less because they're adopted? I asked. I'm saying that biological grandchildren take priority, Mom said. Emma and Jake are carrying on the family name, the family genes. They're the future of this family. Sarah started crying. Anna ran upstairs. Finn just stared at his grandmother with this heartbroken expression that I'll never forget. You need to think about what's best for everyone, Dad finally spoke up. Dylan's struggling and you're doing well. You can afford to make sacrifices. Sacrifices? I was seeing red now. You want me to give up my house? Temporarily, Dylan said, just until I get back on my feet. How long is temporarily? Dylan shrugged. However long it takes. That's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't about helping Dylan find a place. This was about them taking my place. They'd already moved my kids out of their rooms, already made themselves at home, already gotten my parents on their side. Get out, I said quietly. Now, son, Dad started. Get out, I yelled. All of you. This is my house and I want you out. Now. Dylan jumped up. You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go. Should have thought of that before you stole my kids' rooms. That's when Mom played her trump card. She started crying, talking about how disappointed she was in me, how I was choosing those kids over my real family, how Emma and Jake would remember that Uncle George kicked them out when they needed help, and Anna, Finn, and Zoe will remember that their grandmother thought they were worth less than dirt. I shot back. The fight went on for another hour. My parents and Dylan kept tag-teaming me, using every guilt trip and manipulation tactic in the book. How could I be so selfish? What would people think? Family is supposed to take care of family. But I was done. Done with the favoritism, done with the manipulation, done with watching my kids be treated like second-class citizens in their own home. I told Dylan he had until the end of the week to find somewhere else to go. I told my parents that they were no longer welcome in my house until they apologized to my wife and kids. And I told all of them that if they couldn't accept my entire family, including my adopted kids and Zoe, then they wouldn't be part of our lives. They left, but not before Mom made sure to tell me exactly what she thought of my choice. "You're going to regret this," she said. "When those kids grow up and leave you for their real families, you'll realize what you threw away for strangers." The thing is, even after they left, Dylan didn't pack up. He stayed in my house like nothing happened, like I hadn't just told him to leave. He kept acting like he belonged there, like eventually I'd come to my senses. So I made it official. I changed the locks. Friday morning, Dylan and his family came back from taking the kids to school to find they couldn't get in the house. All their stuff was packed neatly on the front porch. I'd spent Thursday night boxing everything up, making sure nothing was damaged or missing. Dylan started pounding on the door, yelling about how I couldn't do this, how it was illegal, how he was going to call the police. I opened the door just wide enough to hand him a letter from my lawyer, explaining that he'd been given proper notice to vacate and that continuing to stay would constitute trespassing. "Where are we supposed to go?" Melissa cried. "Not my problem," I said, and shut the door. I know that sounds harsh, but I was protecting my family. My real family: Sarah, Anna, Finn, and Zoe. The people who'd been treated like garbage by my blood relatives. Dylan did call the police, but since he'd never paid rent and wasn't on any lease, they told him it was a civil matter. He'd have to take me to court if he wanted to dispute it, and we all knew he couldn't afford a lawyer. The first few days after they left were rough. My kids were confused about why their cousins were suddenly gone. Anna kept asking if it was her fault, if she'd done something wrong. Finn started having more nightmares. Zoe, who's already been through so much loss, was terrified that Sarah and I were going to abandon her too. Sarah and I spent a lot of time talking to them, explaining that none of this was their fault, that they were loved and wanted and valued. It broke my heart that they even had to question it. But you know what? After about a week, things started getting better. The house felt peaceful again. My kids could relax in their own home. Anna set up her art station in the basement again. Finn stopped wetting the bed. Zoe started smiling more. Sarah and I stopped fighting. Our marriage, which had been strained to the breaking point, started healing. We remembered why we fell in love with each other, why we chose to build a family together. For the first time in months, we were happy. That lasted exactly 9 days. On the 10th day, I got a call at work from a number I didn't recognize. It was Dylan, and he was crying. "George, please, you have to help us. I told you, Emma's in the hospital." That stopped me cold. Whatever I thought of Dylan and Melissa, Emma was just a little girl, my niece. "What happened?" "She has pneumonia. We've been staying in the car, and it's been so cold at night. She got sick, and now she's really sick, and the doctors are saying she might need to stay for a week, maybe more." My blood ran cold. They'd been living in their car for over a week, in October, with 2 little kids. "Dylan, I know you're mad at me, but please. She's your niece. She's just a little girl. Where are you?" "Children's Hospital. Please, George. I'm begging you." I told him I'd be there as soon as I could and called Sarah to let her know what was happening. She immediately said she'd meet me there, because that's the kind of person she is. Despite everything Dylan and my parents had done to her and our kids, she still cared about Emma and Jake. The scene at the hospital was heartbreaking. Emma looked so small in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, struggling to breathe. Jake was curled up in a chair, dirty and scared. Dylan looked like he hadn't slept in days, and Melissa was a complete mess. "Thank you for coming," Dylan said when he saw me. "I didn't know who else to call." "What exactly has been happening since you left?" That's when the whole story came out. After I locked them out, they'd gone to my parents' house. But Mom and Dad only have a small 2-bedroom place, and they said they couldn't accommodate a family of 4 long-term. They let them stay 2 nights, then told them they needed to figure something else out. Dylan had applied for emergency housing assistance, but there was a waiting list. He'd tried staying with friends, but nobody could take in a family of 4. They'd spent their last money on cheap motel rooms for a few nights, but that ran out quickly. For the past week, they'd been sleeping in their car, trying to shower at truck stops, having the kids use bathrooms at McDonald's. Dylan had been doing day labor when he could find it, but it wasn't enough. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked. "Because you made it clear you didn't want us around," Dylan said bitterly. "Because Mom said you'd chosen your fake family over your real one." Even then, even with his daughter in the hospital because of choices he'd made, he was still taking shots at my kids. But looking at Emma, so small and sick, I couldn't just walk away. Whatever Dylan had done, Emma didn't deserve this. I talked to Sarah, and we agreed to pay for a motel room for Dylan's family while Emma recovered. Nothing fancy, just a place where they could be warm and clean. I also contacted some services that could help them find permanent housing. Dylan was pathetically grateful, kept thanking me over and over, saying he knew I was a good brother, that he was sorry for everything that had happened. I should have known it was too easy. Emma recovered after 5 days in the hospital. She's a tough little kid, and with proper medical care, she bounced back quickly. I was relieved. Nobody wants to see a child suffer, regardless of the family drama. But here's where Dylan showed his true colors again. Instead of using the time to actually find housing or get his life together, he saw Emma's illness as an opportunity. The day after Emma was discharged, Dylan called me. "George, I've been thinking. Maybe we can work something out." "What kind of something?" "Well, Emma's still recovering. The doctor said she needs a stable environment, no stress. Maybe she and Jake could stay with you guys, just temporarily, while Melissa and I get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to take your kids?" "Just for a little while. You've got the space, the good insurance. Emma needs follow-up care." "Dylan, no. We just went through this." "But Emma almost died, George. She almost died because we don't have anywhere decent to live. Do you want that on your conscience?" There it was. The guilt trip. Using his sick daughter to manipulate me into giving him what he wanted. "Your daughter almost died because you chose to live in a car rather than swallow your pride and find an actual solution," I said. "That's on you, not me. So you're just going to let them suffer? I'm going to let you figure out how to take care of your own children, like a parent should." He hung up on me. That evening, I got a call from Mom. She'd heard about Emma, from Dylan, obviously, and wanted to lecture me about family responsibility. "That little girl could have died," she said. "How can you live with yourself knowing you could have prevented this?" I offered to help find them housing services. I paid for a motel room. I did more than Dylan did to protect his own daughter. "You should let them move back in, at least until they get stable." "Mom, they had 2 months to get stable. Dylan spent that time playing house in my home instead of looking for a real solution. Those children are your blood, George. They should come first. All children should come first, including Anna, Finn, and Zoe. Those aren't your real children." There it was again. The same toxic attitude that had started this whole mess. "Those are my children," I said firmly. "And if you can't accept that, then we don't have anything more to talk about. You're going to throw away your whole family for some strangers? I'm protecting my family from people who think some kids matter more than others based on biology." I hung up and blocked her number. That should have been the end of it, but Dylan wasn't done. Over the next week, he tried everything. He had different relatives call me. He showed up at my work. He even had Emma call me, crying, asking why Uncle George didn't want her to have a nice home. That one almost broke me. Hearing that little girl, who'd just been so sick, asking why her uncle didn't love her. But I had to remember that Emma wasn't the one manipulating the situation. Dylan was using his own daughter's emotions as a weapon. The final straw came the following weekend. I was in the backyard with my kids, raking leaves, when I heard the front door open. I figured Sarah had come back from her grocery run, but when I went inside, I found Dylan standing in my living room with a suitcase. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" "Mom gave me her key," he said casually. "She said she still had it from when she used to check on your place when you went on vacation. Get out, right now." "George, be reasonable. Emma's still not 100%. The motel room is making her cough worse. She needs her father to act like an adult and find appropriate housing? I'm trying, but everything's so expensive, and with Emma's medical bills, the medical bills that would have been prevented if you'd taken responsibility for your family in the first place." Dylan's face hardened. "You know what? Fine. Be selfish. But don't blame me when Emma ends up back in the hospital." "I won't blame you," I said. "But I sure as hell will blame you because you're her father, and it's your job to protect her." I called the police while Dylan was still standing there. Told them someone had entered my home without permission using a stolen key. Dylan left before they arrived, but not before he made sure to tell my kids that Uncle George was kicking their cousins out again. Anna started crying. Finn asked if Emma was going to die because we wouldn't help. Zoe just looked scared, like she always does when adults start fighting. That night, Sarah and I had a long talk about whether we were doing the right thing. These were children we were talking about. Yes, Dylan was manipulative and irresponsible, but Emma and Jake were innocent. But we also had to think about our own kids. Anna had just started feeling secure in her own home again. Finn had stopped having nightmares. Zoe was beginning to trust that we wouldn't abandon her like everyone else in her life had. "If we keep enabling Dylan," Sarah said, "he'll never learn to stand on his own feet, and our kids will never feel truly safe in their own home." She was right. As much as it hurt to see Emma and Jake suffer, we couldn't sacrifice our children's well-being to fix Dylan's mistakes. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I needed to get Mom's key back, and I needed to make some things clear. I found Mom in her garden, tending to her fall flowers. She looked up when I walked over, and I could see she was expecting another fight. I want the key back, I said. What key? The spare key to my house that you gave Dylan. I don't know what you're talking about. Mom, Dylan told me you gave it to him. He used it to break into my house yesterday. She straightened up, and I could see the defiance in her eyes. That boy needed help, and you've turned your back on him. That man needed to take responsibility for his choices, and you've enabled him instead. Those are your brother's children, George. Your flesh and blood. And Anna, Finn, and Zoe are my children. My flesh and blood through choice, which makes them even more valuable. You can't compare adopted children to biological ones. Watch me. I held out my hand. The key, Mom. I threw it away. Then you need to understand something very clearly. If Dylan shows up at my house again, I'm pressing charges. If anyone from this family harasses me, my wife, or my kids again, I'm getting a restraining order. And if you ever suggest again that my children are worth less than Dylan's, I'm done with all of you permanently. Mom started crying then, the manipulative tears she'd always used to get her way. How can you say that to your own mother? How can you say that adopted children don't count to your own son who adopted 2 of them? I just want what's best for the family. Then you should want what's best for all the children in this family, not just the ones with the right DNA. I left without the key, but I changed the locks again that afternoon anyway. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, things have been quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I kept expecting more manipulation attempts, more guilt trips, more family members calling to tell me what a terrible person I was. Instead, I got silence. Until yesterday. My phone rang while I was making dinner. It was my Aunt Carol, Mom's sister. I almost didn't answer because I figured it was just another attempt to guilt me into taking Dylan back. George, honey, I think you need to know what's been happening. That got my attention. Aunt Carol has always been the straight shooter in the family, the one who doesn't get involved in drama. What's going on? Your parents are in a bad way financially. Your dad's been trying to help Dylan and his family, and it's gotten out of hand. Apparently, after I refused to let Dylan move back in, my parents had taken them in again. But 4 extra people in a small 2-bedroom house was unsustainable, especially with 2 young kids who needed space and stability. So Dad had decided to help Dylan get a rental. Not just help with the deposit, he'd co-signed the lease and agreed to cover the first 6 months of rent. We're talking about nearly $8,000 out of their fixed retirement income. But that wasn't the end of it. Emma had another health scare the week after moving into the rental. Just a bad cold. But Dylan had panicked and taken her to the emergency room. No insurance, of course. So that was another couple thousand in medical bills that Dad felt obligated to cover. Then, there were the basics Dylan couldn't afford. Furniture for the new place, clothes for the kids, groceries, utilities deposits. Dad kept opening his wallet, and Mom kept encouraging him because those children need stability. Carol, how much money are we talking about here? Close to $15,000 in the past month, George. Your parents have cleaned out their savings and taken cash advances on their credit cards. My stomach dropped. My parents were living on Social Security and Dad's small pension. They didn't have $15,000 to spare. There's more, Carol continued. Dylan's been telling people that you threw your sick niece out in the cold, that you chose your adopted kids over your real family. He's got half the family thinking you're some kind of monster. And what do you think? I think Dylan's a grown man who should be taking care of his own family instead of bleeding your parents dry. But your parents are too proud to admit they can't afford to keep helping him. That evening, Sarah and I talked about what Carol had told me. Part of me felt vindicated. This was exactly what I'd been afraid would happen if I enabled Dylan's irresponsibility. But another part of me felt guilty. These were my parents, and they were suffering financially because they were trying to help their grandchildren. What do you want to do? Sarah asked. I don't know. If I help them, I'm just enabling the same pattern. But if I don't, your parents made their choice, George. They chose to prioritize Dylan's family over yours, and now they're dealing with the consequences. She was right, but it didn't make me feel better. This morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My heart started pounding. That many messages usually means someone's dead or dying. The first call was from Carol. George, you need to get to the hospital. Your dad had a heart attack. I threw on clothes and drove straight to the hospital, calling Sarah on the way to let her know what was happening. Whatever issues I had with my parents, I didn't want my father to die. I found Mom in the waiting room, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. When she saw me, she started crying. Not the manipulative tears from before, but real, broken sobs. The doctors say he's stable, she said. But George, I'm so scared. I can't lose him. I can't lose him too. Too? What do you mean too? That's when the whole story came out. Dad hadn't just had a heart attack. He'd had it while arguing with Dylan about money. Dylan had come over demanding more cash, saying Emma needed new clothes and Jake needed school supplies. When Dad said they couldn't afford any more, Dylan had blown up. You spent money on George's brat kids for years, Dylan had yelled. But when your real grandchildren need help, suddenly you're broke. We are broke, Dad had said. We've given you everything we have. Then get more. Take out another loan. Sell something. That's when Dad clutched his chest and collapsed. Dylan just stood there, Mom whispered. He didn't call 911, didn't try to help. He just stood there asking if this meant we couldn't give him money for Emma's clothes. I felt like I was going to be sick. Where is Dylan now? I don't know. He left after the ambulance came. I haven't heard from him since. Of course he did. The moment the situation became about someone else's needs instead of his own, Dylan disappeared. I stayed at the hospital all day. Dad was stable but sedated, and the doctors wanted to keep him for observation. Mom and I sat in uncomfortable silence for hours, both thinking about how things had gotten so messed up. Finally, Mom spoke. I owe you an apology? Mom, no, let me say this. I was wrong about your kids. I was wrong about a lot of things. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Anna, Finn, and Zoe, they're good kids. They're your kids. I had no right to suggest they mattered less than Emma and Jake. Thank you for saying that. I was so focused on biological connections that I forgot what really makes a family. You chose those children, George. You chose to love them and care for them and make them part of your life. That's more meaningful than just sharing DNA. We talked for hours while waiting for news about Dad. She told me about the financial strain, about how she'd been encouraging Dad to help Dylan because she felt guilty about Emma getting sick. She told me about how Dylan had been manipulating them, using the kids as emotional weapons, making them feel like bad grandparents if they didn't provide everything he demanded. We enabled him, she admitted. We thought we were helping, but we just made him more dependent. When Dad woke up the next morning, the first thing he asked for was me. The doctor said I could see him for a few minutes. He looked so frail in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, but his eyes were clear when he looked at me. I'm sorry, son, he said. I should have listened to you about Dylan. Dad, just focus on getting better. No, I need to say this. You were right. About everything. Dylan doesn't take responsibility, and we kept enabling him. We hurt you and Sarah and your kids because we were too blind to see what was really happening. It's okay, Dad. It's not okay. Those are your children. Anna, Finn, Zoe. They're my grandchildren too, and I should have treated them that way from the beginning. I stayed with my parents for the next few days while Dad recovered. Sarah brought our kids to visit, and for the first time ever, I watched my parents genuinely interact with Anna, Finn, and Zoe. Not the polite but distant treatment they'd always gotten, but real interest and affection. Anna showed Dad some of her artwork, and he spent 20 minutes talking with her about different techniques and colors. Finn climbed into Mom's lap and fell asleep while she read to him. Zoe, who's usually shy around my parents, actually initiated a conversation about her favorite books. It should have been a happy ending to a terrible situation, but there was still the Dylan problem. He finally showed up on the third day, walking into Dad's hospital room like nothing had happened. Hey, Dad, how are you feeling? The man had nearly killed his own father with stress over money, had walked away when Dad collapsed, and now he was acting like concerned son of the year. Where have you been? I asked. I had to take care of some things. Emma had another doctor's appointment, and Jake needed... You left Dad on the floor having a heart attack to take care of things. I called 911. Mom called 911. You left? Dylan's face hardened. I don't have to listen to this from you. Dad, I talked to a lawyer about getting some of the money back from George, since he basically stole our inheritance by making you waste money helping us instead of him taking care of his own family. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after everything that had happened, Dylan was still trying to make this about money, still trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Dad sat up in his hospital bed, and I could see color coming back into his face. Not the healthy kind, the angry kind. Dylan, I want you to leave, Dad said quietly. What? I want you to leave this room, leave this hospital, and don't come back until you're ready to take responsibility for your own life. Dad, you can't mean that. Emma and Jake need a father who acts like a man instead of a child. They need a father who gets a job and keeps it, who pays his own bills, who doesn't use his children as emotional blackmail. Dylan looked around the room like he was expecting someone to back him up. When nobody did, he tried his last desperate card. Fine, but don't expect me to bring the kids around anymore. If you want to see Emma and Jake, you can deal with me. Otherwise, you'll never see your real grandchildren again. Mom stood up, and I saw a strength in her I'd never seen before. My real grandchildren are standing right there, she said, pointing to Anna, Finn, and Zoe. And sitting right there, pointing to me and Sarah. And if you think you can use Emma and Jake as pawns, you're wrong. I love those children, but I won't be manipulated by their father anymore. Dylan stormed out, but not before knocking over a chair and saying some choice words about all of us. That was a week ago. Since then, we've had peace. Real peace for the first time in months. Dad is home and recovering well. The doctors say his heart is strong. It was just the stress that caused the attack. Mom and Dad have been working with a financial advisor to deal with the debt Dylan's demands created, and they've made it clear they won't be giving him any more money. More importantly, they've been making an effort with my kids. Real effort. Last weekend, Mom taught Anna how to bake cookies. Dad's been helping Finn with a model airplane. Zoe actually hugged them both when we left last Sunday.